Amara thought the man running toward her was coming to stop her wedding. She was wrong. 3 hours earlier, she had discovered that her Korean pilot boyfriend had been cheating on her. She had spent 6 years loving him. 6 years believing they would grow old together. And now, she was standing outside a luxury hotel watching him kiss another woman, her heart shattered. But what happened next was even more unbelievable. As Amara walked away crying through the freezing Seoul night, a convoy of black cars suddenly stopped beside her. Several men in black suits stepped out. Then the rear door opened. A Korean man in a black suit stepped onto the snow. Everyone around him immediately lowered their heads. Kang Tae-jun, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul. He walked toward the heartbroken Nigerian woman, looked into her eyes, and said something that left her completely speechless. "I've waited 10 years for the day you would finally become free." Amara thought he was talking about someone else, until he showed her a photograph of her, taken 10 years earlier. And suddenly, she realized the most dangerous man in Korea had been secretly watching over her life for years. But there was something even more shocking. Her cheating boyfriend knew exactly who Tae-jun was, and he had been desperately trying to keep Amara away from him. That confession was still hours away. To understand how a single snowy night could hold so much heartbreak, so much danger, and so much hidden love, we have to go back to the ordinary afternoon when everything Amara believed about her life quietly began to fall apart. Snow fell over Seoul on the night Amara's whole world quietly broke apart, and she did not even know it yet. She had spent the afternoon getting ready with a kind of nervous joy she had not felt in months, curling her hair, choosing a soft red dress, telling herself that tonight, after 6 long years, Daniel was finally going to ask her to marry him. He had been strange lately, distracted, checking his phone with his back turned, coming home late from flights that did not match the schedule she remembered him mentioning. She had convinced herself it was nerves. She had convinced herself it was a surprise he was planning. She wanted so badly to believe it that she stopped asking questions. The message came from a friend who worked at the front desk of one of the city's most expensive hotels, a place where diplomats and executives stayed when they wanted to disappear for a night. The friend sent a photo without a single word attached, and in that photo, Daniel stood in the golden light of a hotel corridor, his pilot's jacket slung over one arm, his hand resting on the waist-off a Korean woman Amara had never seen before. Amara stared at the photo for a long time before her body understood what her eyes already knew. Something inside her chest folded in on itself, quiet and total, like a building collapsing with no sound. She took a taxi to the hotel without deciding to. She walked through the lobby past crystal chandeliers and marble floors that reflected her own trembling reflection back at her, and she found the elevator, and she found the floor, and she found the door, and when it opened, she found the truth standing in front of her in a bathrobe, laughing at something on his phone before his eyes lifted and met hers, and the laughter died instantly on his face. Amara did not scream. She did not cry in front of him. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at a stranger, and then she turned and walked away, her heels echoing down a hallway that suddenly felt 1,000 miles long. Outside, the snow had grown heavier, falling in soft, thick flakes that clung to her bare shoulders as she stumbled down the hotel steps into the freezing Seoul night. She did not care where she was going. She only knew she needed to be anywhere Daniel was not. 6 years of memoirs moved through her mind, uninvited, birthdays, quiet mornings, promises whispered in the dark, all of it suddenly rewritten into something false. She walked past glowing shop windows and steaming street food stalls, past couples laughing under umbrellas, until her legs simply stopped working and she sank onto a cold stone bench, her body shaking from cold and heartbreak in equal measure. That was when she heard it. The low, controlled hum of engines moving in formation, too smooth, too disciplined to be ordinary traffic. She lifted her head and saw them, 3 black luxury vehicles gliding to a stop at the curb, their windows tinted so dark they looked like closed eyes. Doors opened in perfect unison. Men in black suits stepped out, silent, alert, scanning the street the way soldiers scan a battlefield. Every person nearby seemed to instinctively lower their eyes and move faster, as though some invisible signal had passed through the crowd warning them to disappear. Amara had lived in Seoul long enough to recognize what she was looking at, even through her tears. She had heard whispers about a man who controlled entire districts of the city from the shadows, a man whose name alone could empty a restaurant. And then the rear door of the center vehicle opened, and he stepped out into the snow, tall, dressed in a black coat that moved like water, his expression unreadable, his presence somehow silencing the entire street. Kang Tae-jun. The Mafia Boss of Seoul was walking directly toward her. Nearby, a delivery man froze mid-step, his bicycle nearly toppling over as he lowered his ice and hurried away without a word. A couple who had been arguing outside a cafe fell instantly silent, pulling their coats tighter and disappearing around the corner. Even the falling snow seemed to hush, as though the entire street understood, without being told, that a man like this one did not simply pass through a neighborhood unnoticed. And yet none of that fear touched the way he looked at Amara, a woman he had never officially met, sitting broken and frozen on a bench that suddenly felt very small beneath the weight of his attention. Every instinct told Amara to run, but her body was too cold and too broken to obey. She braced herself for danger, for threat, for the kind of violence his reputation promised. Instead, Tae-jun did something that made no sense at all. He removed his own coat and placed it gently over her shaking shoulders, his movements careful, almost reverent, as though she were something rare that must not be damaged. He said nothing about who he was or why he had stopped. He simply crouched slightly to meet her eyes, studied her face for a moment too long, and then straightened and gestured for one of his men to bring the car closer. Amara wanted to ask why a man like him would stop for a stranger crying alone on a bench in Thesno. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something that felt less like a stranger's curiosity and more like recognition, as though he already knew the shape of her sadness before she had shown it to him. He guided her into the warmth of the vehicle, gave the driver hair address without asking for it, and sat in silence beside her the entire ride, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as though holding back 10 years of something he was not yet ready to say. In the days that followed, Amara could not stop replaying the hotel corridor in her mind, searching for the moment she had missed. She began going through old messages, old receipts, old flight schedules Daniel had once shown her proudly, and slowly, painfully, a pattern emerged that she had refused to see before. Flights that did not exist. Layovers that lasted 3 days longer than any airline required. A perfume on his jacket collar 18 months ago that she had accepted his explanation for without question. The affair had not been a mistake made in a single week moment. It had been a second life, carefully built and carefully hidden, stretching back almost 2 years. Each discovery cut deeper than the last, not because the facts themselves were new, but because Ethy proved how completely she had trusted a man who had been lying to her with practiced ease for a very long time. She remembered nights she had cried herself to sleep worrying that she was somehow not enough for him, when the truth had never been about her at all. It had been about Ammon who wanted the comfort of loyalty without the discipline of giving it back. Meanwhile, whispers about Kang Tae-jun followed Amara everywhere she went, even though she tried not to listen. People spoke of him the way people speak of storms, with fear dressed up as respect. He was said to control shipping routes, nightclubs, and quiet corners of the city's underworld that ordinary citizens never saw. Rivals who crossed him disappeared from the city entirely. And yet, in the one encounter Amara had with him, none of that cruelty had been visible. What she remembered instead was the careful way he had placed his coat over her shoulders, as though her comfort mattered more than his own reputation. A strange memory began to surface, faint and half-formed, of a snowy night 10 years earlier, back when she was a university exchange student new to Seoul, homesick and unsure of herself. She remembered finding a stranger, a young man, alone and bleeding quietly outside a convenience store, refusing to go to a hospital, refusing to explain why. She remembered buying him a warm drink with the little money she had, sitting beside him in silence until his hands stopped shaking, and then walking away without ever learning his name. She had almost completely forgotten him. He, it seemed, had never forgotten her at all. What Amara could not have known was that the boy on that sidewalk had been only hours away from, a decision he never spoke of afterward, abandoned by the men who were supposed to protect them, certain that no one in the entire city would notice if he simply disappeared into the snow. Hervey's, gentle and unbothered by his silence, had been the first kindness shown to him in longer than he could remember. He had watched her walk away that night and promised himself, in the quiet, furious way that broken young men make promises, that if he ever became someone with power, he would spend it making sure nothing bad ever happened to her again. Small, unexplained kindnesses from her past began replaying themselves in a new light. A landlord who mysteriously forgave a missed rent payment during her hardest semester. A dangerous late-night taxi ride that ended with the driver refusing payment and disappearing before she could ask why. A job offer that arrived exactly when she needed it most, from a company she never applied to. Amara had once believed these were simply lucky coincidences stitched together by chance. Now she began to wonder if someone had been quietly rewriting her hardest moments from the shadows, for reasons she still did not understand. If you have ever loved someone loyally, while a quieter kind of love waited patiently in the background without asking for anything in return, because Amara's story is only just beginning, and what she discovers next about the two men in her life will change everything she believed about love. Daniel, sensing that something had shifted, tried desperately to repair what he had broken, showing up at her apartment with flowers and apologies that felt rehearsed rather than sincere. But Amara noticed something new in his panic, a fear that went beyond simply losing her. Every time she mentioned the black vehicles from that snowy night, Daniel's face lost color entirely. Heck knew exactly who had stopped for her. He had known about Tae-jun's existence in her life for far longer than he had ever admitted, and the realization that his rival was not simply a stranger, but Ammon who had loved her in silence for years, terrified him in a way his own guilt never had. What Amara did not yet know was that Daniel's fear ran deeper than jealousy. Some of the private charter flights he piloted carried passengers he had been warned never to question, quiet men who moved through Seoul without leaving records behind. One of those men had taken a personal interest in learning everything Daniel could tell him about the Nigerian woman on his arm, and Daniel, frightened and flattered in equal measure, had said more than he ever should have. It became clear that Daniel's insecurity about a man he refused to name had been quietly poisoning their relationship long before the affair ever began, turning his love into control. Disguised as devotion, learning this did not excuse what he had done. It only made the betrayal feel heavier because it meant he had chosen selfishness even while sensing, somewhere deep down, that he did not deserve the loyalty Amara had given him so completely. Days later, standing in the apartment they had shared for years, surrounded by boxes of a life she was dismantling piece by piece, Amara finally said the words that ended 6 years in a single sentence, telling Daniel that she was done waiting for a version of him that had never truly existed. The loneliness that followed was heavier than she expected. She had built her entire adult identity around loving one man faithfully, and without him, she did not fully know who she was. Tae-jun did not appear at her door demanding gratitude or affection. He simply remained present at the edges of her life, a car that happened to pass at the right moment, a quiet presence at a distance during a difficult night, patient in a way that asked nothing of her broken heart. And then, without warning, a black sedan began following her home from work, driven by men who did not belong to Tae-jun's world at all. And Amara realized, with a cold rush of fear, that being close to the truth about him had made her a target. The car followed her for 3 blocks before Amara understood she was not imagining it, and by the time she reached her building, her hands were shaking too badly to find her keys. Before the men inside the sedan could act, headlights swept across the street and Tae-jun's convoy arrived, sudden and silent, cutting off the other vehicle before it could get close. What happened next took only seconds, but it told Amara everything she needed to know about the world Tae-jun lived in. His men moved with terrifying precision, and the strangers who had been following her were gone before she could fully process what she had witnessed. Tae-jun himself said nothing about violence or danger. He only asked, with quiet urgency, whether she was hurt. The men belonged to Director H. Wang, a rival who had spent a decade trying to break Tae-jun's organization from the inside and had never found the crack he needed, until Daniel's careless words gave him one. It was H. Wang's people who had quietly cultivated the woman Daniel had been seeing, feeding her patience and attention until Daniel let slip, piece by piece, exactly how much the woman he was betraying meant to a man H. Wang had hunted for years. To H. Wang, Amara was not a person. She was the first weakness he had ever found in Kang Tae-jun, and He did not intend to waste it. 2 nights later, Wang stopped hiding. A team of his men moved on Amara's workplace in broad daylight, and only Tae-jun's warning, delivered through a single urgent phone call, gave He enough time to run. He reached her himself before his own men did, pulling her through a service corridor as gunfire cracked somewhere behind them, shielding her body with his own against a stairwell wall until the danger passed. When the silence finally came, Amara saw the dark line of blood soaking through his shirt where a bullet had grazed his side, and understood, for the first time, that the man who protected everyone else in the city had no one protecting him. In the hours after, sitting in the safety of his home for the first time, surrounded by dark elegant rooms that felt more like a fortress than a mansion, Amara finally asked him directly why Heisnamis would target an ordinary woman who had nothing to do with his world. Tae-jun's answer came slowly, heavy with things he had clearly never said aloud before. He explained that in his world, love was treated as weakness to be exploited, and that anyone connected to him became a target the moment his enemies discovered she mattered to him. He admitted, finally, that she had mattered to him for 10 years. Outside the tall windows of his study, the lights of Seoul stretched endlessly into the dark, indifferent to the storm quietly unfolding inside that room. Amara studied the man in front of her, a man capable of terrifying an entire city with a single glance. And yet here, in front of her, his hands trembled slightly around the glass he was not drinking from. It was strange to her how the most dangerous man in Seoul seemed more afraid of her reaction than of any enemy he had ever faced. He told her about the boy he had been before he became the man the city feared, a boy abandoned by everyone who should have protected him, bleeding outside a convenience store on the worst night of his life, ready to give up entirely. He told her about a stranger who sat beside him in Thekold and refused to leave, who bought him a warm drink with money she clearly did not have to spare, who never once asked what was wrong or demanded an explanation. He told her that her small act of kindness had been the only reason he chose to survive that night, and that he had spent every year since trying to become someone worthy of protecting her, even from a distance, even if she never knew his name. Ending Wang's war took one more thing Tae-jun had never given up for anyone. He met Wang personally, without his usual army of men, and offered him the shipping routes and territory Wang had spent 10 years trying to steal, everything handed over freely in exchange for one condition, that Amara's name would never again be spoken in Wang's plans. His own people called it surrender. Tae-jun called it the first time in his life that loving someone had mattered more to him than winning. Amara sat in silence as the truth settled over her, reshaping every strange kindness of the past 10 years into a single unbroken thread of devotion. He had rescued her from financial ruin without asking for credit. He had shielded her from danger without asking for acknowledgement. He had watched her build a life with another man, and rather than interfere, he had simply waited, refusing to steal a love that was not freely given. And now she understood he had given up something even larger, an empire built over half his life, simply so she could finally be safe. It was, she realized, the exact opposite of everything Daniel had done. Daniel returned one final time, appearing at her workplace with flowers and desperate promises, insisting that his cheating had been a moment of weakness that did not erase 6 real years together. For a long moment, old memories pulled at her heart, the comfort of familiarity fighting against the pain of betrayal. But standing there, Amara finally understood the difference with complete clarity. Daniel had loved the version of her that fit conveniently into his plans, and the instant she stopped fitting perfectly, he had reached for someone else. Tae-jun had loved her for a decade with nothing to gain, expecting nothing back, even while she belonged to someone else entirely. Real love, she realized, was not the love that demanded to be chosen. It was the love that waited, patiently, for her to choose it herself. The wedding took place on a morning when soft snow fell over a traditional Korean estate, ancient wooden buildings dusted white, red lanterns glowing warm against the pale winter sky. Amara wore a gown the color of ivory silk, her dark skin radiant against the white snow, her expression calm and certain in a way it had not been in months. Tae-jun stood waiting in an elegant black formal suit, His usual guarded intensity softened into something almost boyish, Haisai's never once leaving her as she approached. At the edges of the ceremony, his men stood in respectful silence, a strange and striking contrast between the dangerous world he ruled and the fragile peace of the moment unfolding before them. Near the end of the ceremony, a figure broke through the edge of the crowd and began running across the snow-covered courtyard toward the altar. Gasps rippled through the guests. Tae-jun's men tensed instantly, hands moving toward their coats, and for one frozen second the entire wedding seemed to hold its breath, certain that Daniel had come to tear the moment apart. Amara thought the same thing, her heart pounding as he closed the distance between them, breathless snow catching in his hair. She was wrong. Daniel stopped a few steps away, looked at her once fully. The way a man looks at something he finally understands he never deserved, and simply bowed his head in quiet surrender. He had not come to stop anything. He had come only to let her go. Then he turned and disappeared into the falling snow, and Amara, calm and unafraid, reached for Tae-jun's hand in front of everyone as her final, unspoken answer. Weeks later, unpacking boxes in her new home, Amara found an old wooden box hidden at the back of Tae-jun's private study. Inside, she discovered a faded photograph of herself from 10 years earlier, taken from a distance she never noticed. A dried flower pressed carefully between 2 pages. A birthday card she had once thrown away, somehow rescued and kept. A hospital receipt from a night she barely remembered being sick and finding her bills mysteriously already paid. And beneath all of it, a folded letter, yellowed slightly with age, dated nearly 10 years earlier, written and never sent, confessing feelings a heartbroken boy had never believed had deserved to speak aloud. It was then that Amara understood the deepest truth of all. Tae-jun had watched her fall in love with someone else, had the power to interfere at any moment, and had chosen not to because he believed that love taken by force was not truly love at all. He had wanted her to choose him freely, or not at all. Years later, in a quiet home far from the noise of Seoul's underworld, Amara would sometimes stand by the window watching snow fall, remembering the broken woman she had been on that first devastating night. Tae-jun was still a man feared throughout the city, still a man whose name emptied rooms and silenced streets. But inside their home, surrounded by the sound of their children's laughter, he was simply a husband who reached for her hand every evening without being asked, a father who read bedtime stories in a voice the rest of the world would never recognize. Amara understood now that the worst night of her life, the night her heart shattered in a hotel corridor, had quietly become the beginning of the only love story she had ever truly needed, one that had been waiting patiently in the snow for 10 long years to be found.